You know that feeling when someone you care about says something so outrageous that you just stare at them, waiting for the joke to land? That was me last Friday night. I was curled up on the couch, cozy in my favorite oversized hoodie, sipping tea, when my husband, Daniel, turned to me with that look. If you're married, you'll know the one. It says, I'm about to say something wild, but just hear me out. Lena, he said, his tone far too serious for a guy holding a slice of pizza, I've got an idea. In the 10 years we've been together, I've heard plenty of Daniel's ideas. Some were harmless, like when he decided he could build a sauna in the backyard using leftover wood. Spoiler, he absolutely couldn't. Others were, let's say, less sensible. Like the time he was convinced we should sell everything and live in a van, despite the fact that he can't handle road trips longer than 3 hours. Naturally, I braced myself. All right, I said, drawing the word out. Should I be worried? He flashed a grin. No, this one's actually good. Life-changing even. That's when I felt that odd flip in my stomach. The kind you get when you know the next thing someone says is going to change everything. Daniel leaned in, his eyes practically glowing with excitement. Wait, hold on, I interrupted. To understand why this is so huge, you need to know something about us. Daniel's the dreamer, the kind of guy who dives headfirst into ideas without stopping to think about pesky details like logic, money, or basic survival skills. I, on the other hand, am the planner. I make lists, do research, and always think 3 steps ahead. We balance each other out, his wild spontaneity versus my cautious practicality. So when he finally said it, when those 6 little words left his mouth, my first reaction was to laugh. But then, something unexpected happened. I actually considered it. And that, my friends, is where the story really begins. Somehow, against all common sense, and probably my own better judgment, I said yes. Before you start guessing, no. We're not moving to a deserted island, quitting our jobs to start a llama farm, or training for a space mission. It's crazier than that. By the end of this story, you'll either think we've completely lost it, or you'll wonder if maybe, just maybe, you should try it too. Buckle up. What happens next changes everything. I stared at Daniel, waiting for him to laugh and admit this was a joke, but he didn't. If anything, his grin grew wider, his eyes sparkling like he was about to reveal a huge secret. Okay, I said, putting down my tea. What exactly are you suggesting? He took a deep breath, like he was gearing up for the pitch of his life. We should switch lives for a month. I blinked. Come again? You and me, we swap roles completely. You take over my world and I'll take over yours. Let me explain something quickly. Daniel and I might be married, but our daily lives couldn't be more different. During the day, he runs a small but thriving carpentry business, spending his time designing custom furniture, working with tools, and lifting heavy planks like it's nothing. Meanwhile, I'm a freelance writer glued to my laptop for hours crafting articles, editing, and occasionally battling imposter syndrome, all while wearing pajama pants. So when Daniel suggested we trade lives for a month, my brain stalled. You want me to build furniture? I asked, half laughing, half panicked. And I'll handle your deadlines, emails, and writing assignments, he replied confidently, as though this was the most logical idea ever. I stared at him. Daniel, you haven't written anything longer than a grocery list since college. He waved me off. How hard can it be? You sit, you type, you drink coffee. I scoffed. And you think I can just build furniture? You're always saying you wish you knew how to use power tools. Yes, but I meant in theory. Exactly, now you'll get real experience. I waited for him to realize how absurd this was, but no, he just kept looking at me like he'd come up with the idea of the century. You're serious? I finally asked. As serious as a heart attack. And then something strange happened. Instead of shutting him down immediately, because, let's be real, that would have been the logical thing to do, I actually considered it. Maybe it was the monotony of my routine, the predictability of my to-do lists. Maybe it was the challenge, the sheer ridiculousness of it. Or maybe it was the fact that for the first time in a long time, Daniel and I were looking at an adventure together instead of just watching other people's adventures on TV. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. I spend a month in your workshop learning to build furniture while you take over my writing gigs and deal with my clients. Daniel nodded. Exactly. And we don't help each other. Nope, full immersion. I took a deep breath, fully aware that this was not my kind of decision. But maybe that was the point. Fine, I said, crossing my arms. I'll do it. That's when Daniel's grin turned mischievous, and I realized he'd already planned ahead. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and the faint sound of Daniel rummaging in my office. That was my first clue that I might have made a huge mistake. I walked in to find him sitting at my desk, squinting at my laptop with a determined expression. So, do you just stare at this thing all day, or is there some spell to make words appear? I crossed my arms. You open a blank document and start typing. He turned to me, grimacing. That's it? No warm-ups, no stretches? I sighed. You know I have real deadlines, right? Clients expect actual work. He cracked his knuckles with mock confidence. Don't worry, babe, I've got this. I had zero faith in him, but before I could argue, he pointed toward the kitchen. Your turn. The workshop opens at 9. I glanced at the clock. 8:42. He'd given me 18 minutes to prepare for his world, a place filled with heavy tools, sawdust, and questionable safety standards. Fantastic. The trade had begun. By the time I arrived at the workshop, I already regretted everything. The air smelled like fresh-cut wood, and Daniel's apprentice Kevin was watching me with barely hidden amusement. So, he said, leaning against a workbench, boss says you're in charge today. I let out a sharp breath. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm just trying to survive. Kevin chuckled. Fair enough. First lesson, meet your new best friend. He handed me a power drill. I held it cautiously like it might explode. Relax, he said. It's not a grenade. Easy for you to say, I muttered. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel was diving into my world, and based on the flood of texts I got, it wasn't going well. Daniel, what's passive voice? And why do 3 people hate me for using it? Daniel, your email inbox is a disaster. How do you even function? Daniel, you wrote 2,000 words on the psychology of home decor. How did you not lose your mind? I smirked at my phone, but before I could reply, Kevin clapped his hands. All right, let's get started. First project, building a chair. I nearly dropped the drill. A chair? Like a real functional chair that people sit on? That's usually how chairs work, he said. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I'd spent years crafting vivid descriptions and painting pictures with words, but now I had to create something tangible. And if that wasn't terrifying enough, Daniel's next text almost made me drop my phone. Daniel, hey, so I may have just agreed to a big project with one of your clients. No big deal. We'll talk later. My stomach flipped. No big deal? Was he serious? I attempted to call him, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic started to rise in my throat, but before I could spiral too much, Kevin placed a hand on my shoulder. You good? He asked. No, I replied. I was far from good. My husband, who thought writing was simply about sitting and typing, had apparently made a business decision for me. Meanwhile, I was still figuring out how to hold a drill without looking like a total fraud. But Kevin was waiting, so I forced a tight smile and said, Yeah, let's make this chair. Meanwhile, Daniel had completely underestimated how challenging my job was. He spent the morning drowning in emails, battling with a blinking cursor, and Googling things like, what does tighten up the prose mean? And how to sound like you know what you're doing. But when a client named Rachel Porter called, things took a turn for the worse. She was a big deal, one of my longest-standing clients, a lifestyle expert with a massive following. Somehow, in a fog of misplaced confidence, Daniel not only spoke to her but also convinced her that he could handle a huge project she'd been unsure about, a 10,000-word feature due in a week. Now, as he stared at the confirmation email she had just sent, reality hit him like a freight train. He was doomed. Back in the workshop, I learned something crucial. I was terrible at this. Kevin had walked me through the steps patiently, but after an hour, all I had to show for it was a very sad-looking wooden frame that wobbled at the slightest movement. Okay, Kevin said, rubbing his chin. Structurally, this is questionable. I groaned. I'm an embarrassment. Hey, everyone starts somewhere. You think Daniel was a master carpenter on day 1? That got a bitter laugh out of me. No, but at least he knew what he was doing. Kevin gave me a knowing look. And do you think he knows what he's doing right now? That shut me up quickly because, yes, Daniel was definitely drowning. Then came the breaking point. Just as I started to regain some confidence and accept that maybe, just maybe, I might someday build something that wouldn't collapse under pressure, my phone vibrated again. Daniel, we have a problem. I quickly typed back. We? What did you do? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and reappeared. I think I just lost Rachel's contract. My breath caught. No, no, no. Losing Rachel would be disastrous. I squeezed my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. For the first time since we started this challenge, it hit me. This wasn't just fun anymore. It was real. And we might have just messed up big time. I typed back angrily. What do you mean you lost Rachel's contract? This time, Daniel called. I answered before the first ring even finished. Okay, before you freak out, he started. Oh, Daniel, I'm freaking out. In fact, I might explode. Explain, he sighed. I was trying to sound professional, confident. I figured if I acted like I knew what I was doing, she wouldn't question it. But then she started asking about strategy, like SEO placement, keyword integration, content structuring. I groaned. You pitched to Rachel without knowing how to back it up. I thought I could handle it, he defended. But then she caught on. She asked if I even had experience writing long-form lifestyle pieces, and when I hesitated for half a second, she said she'd reconsider her options and hung up. My stomach sank. Losing Rachel wasn't just about one paycheck. She was a major client. If she started telling people I wasn't reliable, my entire business could take a hit. I sucked in a breath. Daniel, this is bad. Really bad. I know, he groaned. I screwed up. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Okay, maybe I can fix this. I'll call her and explain that you were... But before I could finish, Kevin approached, holding something in his hands. Lena. He looked concerned. We have a problem. I glanced at him, then at the broken wood in his hands. What is that? Kevin shifted awkwardly. The leg of your chair. I stepped forward and looked at the workbench where my half-built chair had been, except it was no longer there. It was in pieces on the floor. I gasped. It collapsed? Kevin scratched the back of his neck. More like exploded. Daniel's voice crackled through the phone. Wait, what? Exploded? I ignored him. I had spent all day building that chair. Kevin gave me an apologetic shrug. Technically, it was standing for a little while. I clenched my jaw. First, my business was falling apart, and now my literal work was in shambles. Then it hit me. Daniel and I were failing at everything. Not just struggling, but actually failing. I had thought I could waltz into his world and build things as if it was no big deal. He had thought writing was just words on a screen. But here we were, me standing in the wreckage of my chair disaster, and him, on the other end of the phone, having ruined a career-defining contract. We weren't just out of our element, we were crashing and burning. And unless we figured something out fast, this wasn't just going to be a funny story, it was going to be a disaster. I stood there staring at the shattered remains of my so-called chair, my heart pounding in my chest. On the other end of the phone, Daniel was dead silent for the first time since this insane experiment began. Neither of us had a single sarcastic remark or confident reassurance to throw at each other because we had both failed miserably. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to fix this. Daniel sighed. Yeah, but how? Rachel already thinks I'm a fraud, and you just apparently exploded a chair, Kevin snorted. It was more of a dramatic collapse, really. I shot him a look and then focused back on the problem at hand. I'll call Rachel. If I explain the situation, the real situation, maybe I can salvage this. I'll help you rebuild the chair, Kevin added. The right way this time. I nodded. Right. And Daniel? He hesitated. Yeah, you need to write something, anything. Show Rachel you're serious. Prove that you're capable, even if you have to rewrite it a dozen times. Daniel groaned. But I suck at this. I clenched my jaw. And you think I'm just naturally gifted at woodworking? Silence. Then he sighed. Point taken. I hung up, took a deep breath and dialed Rachel's number. To my surprise, she answered on the second ring. "Lena," she said, clipped and professional. "I assume you're calling about our conversation earlier." "Yes," I said, my voice firm but respectful. "And I want to be honest with you about what's going on." I explained everything, how Daniel and I had switched roles for a month, how we both had underestimated each other's work, and how he had definitely oversold himself. "I won't lie to you, Rachel," I continued. "He panicked, but he's willing to put in the work, and if you give him one more shot, I promise he'll deliver something worth your time." She was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, she let out a small laugh and said, "This is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard." I winced, but she interrupted. "I'll give him another chance." I nearly collapsed with relief. "Tell him he has 3 days. If he impresses me, I'll keep the contract." "3 days?" I repeated. "He won't let you down," she chuckled. "Oh, I fully expect him to struggle, but I'm curious to see if he can surprise me." Plot twist number 1. Rachel hadn't written Daniel off completely. I hung up and turned to Kevin. "All right, let's build a chair." Plot twist number 2. By the end of that day, I had actually done it. With Kevin's guidance, and maybe a lot of assistance, I built something that didn't collapse. And back at home, Daniel was actually writing. Neither of us had expected this, but maybe, just maybe, we were actually going to pull it off. 3 days. That was the deadline Rachel had given Daniel to prove himself. And let me tell you, I had never seen my husband take something so seriously. For 72 hours, our house turned into his personal writer boot camp. He barely left my office, chugging coffee like a college student during finals week, muttering things like, "Why do words hate me?" And, "How does Lena make this look so easy?" Meanwhile, I was in the workshop every day, determined to prove to myself that my successful one chair wasn't a fluke. With Kevin's help and a very necessary set of blueprints, I built another chair, and then another. By the time Daniel submitted his draft to Rachel, I had 3 fully functional chairs sitting in the workshop, none of which had collapsed under pressure. A personal victory. But the real question was, had Daniel managed to pull off a miracle? The final verdict came the day Rachel emailed back. I swear Daniel stopped breathing. I watched as he clicked on her message, his fingers hovering over the mouse. "If this is bad," he mumbled, "just remember I love you." I rolled my eyes. "Open it." He did. And then, silence. I couldn't take it anymore. "Daniel?" His lips parted in shock, then slowly a grin spread across his face. "She liked it." I blinked. "Wait, what?" He turned the laptop toward me. Rachel's reply was short, but it was all we needed. "Impressive. Not perfect, but impressive. Let's move forward." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "You did it!" He shook his head, still stunned. "I actually did it." The challenge was over, and our lives were about to return to normal. But were we the same people we were when this started? For years, I had thought of Daniel's work as physical labor. Hard, sure, but straightforward. Yet, after weeks of struggling through it, I realized how wrong I was. In the same breath, Daniel now understood what it took to write for a living. Neither of us was a fraud anymore. We were both just human, trying to figure out how to make it in each other's worlds. So maybe, in a strange way, we both came out of this a little more confident, maybe not experts, but at least capable. And honestly, isn't that all any of us can ask for?